Happy Friday and welcome back into the Millvale Studios. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge, found at riversedgepgh.com. River's Edge is a new kind of radio, and this is a new kind of sports talk. I'm your host, Matt Gike. You'll be in Mr. Gike's neighborhood for the next hour, and you can call this the Men's Swinging Sticks edition because we'll have both hockey talk for the majority of the show and also slide in a little bit of golf as the U.S. Open has returned to the Pittsburgh area. Oakmont Country Club is the scene. I'm on site all weekend for DKPittsburghSports.com, taking a break from the baseball beat. Call it a midsummer palate cleanser up on the Mont of Oak, and it should be a terrific display of both golf and the might of one of the most difficult golf courses on the planet. But the Penguins just completed a difficult course themselves, namely the Stanley Cup playoffs, and they are champions, holding the Stanley Cup overhead for the fourth time in franchise history, second time in this current era with Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Chris Kunitz, and let's not forget Marc-Andre Fleury as well. Those are your five who repeat as champions, again, in this era, if you want to call it that, but it's the fourth time in the history of this team. Local hockey fans can celebrate, and they did. I was down there in the, near the Boulevard of the Allies. I was on Grant Street in particular, near the start of the parade. I had to get a glimpse and get a feel of the celebration. We will have a celebratory mood over the course of the next hour or so. Alan Saunders will join me for the second segment, second period, if you will, as this show is structured like a hockey game, 3 periods and an overtime. If you're just listening for the first time, I'll usually give you my solo commentary in the first period, and then we'll move on from then on out. Alan will join me, as I mentioned. Alan's a freelance journalist working primarily for the Associated Press and PiratesProspects.com, but we will talk pucks in just a little bit. Also after that, as promised, some golf discussion. Mike Matheson, the sports editor for the Weirton Daily Times and the Steubenville Herald-Star, also a former golf pro, one of my favorite people on the planet to talk about one of my favorite sports, which is golf, a game that's very near to my heart. Played it a lot growing up, still do to this day, and very special to be, as I mentioned, at Oakmont this week. Also, later in the program, much later, in fact, third period and overtime, I'll have my weekly segments repeating here on Gike's Got Game. Kill the cliche. I will kill a bit of sports lexicon, sports phrasing that I find to be particularly tiresome. And again, I will bring to you my final number, an interesting stat or figure that tells a story on this day. And this day is Friday, June 17th, 2016. And this, as I mentioned, is Gike's Got Game. What a scene from San Jose, California. I'm not certain I would have picked that out as the next championship clinching site for a Pittsburgh sports team, but maybe I should have, because the Sharks have been in the playoffs. They've been knocking at the door for many years, and as soon as the middle of March rolled around, I had a feeling we'd be seeing the Penguins play deep into the spring and even early summer, depending on when you consider summer to start. If you're a person who says, yeah, June 1st is the start of summer, then the Penguins were not just the boys of winter, they were the boys of spring and the boys of summer this year. But what does it all mean? Does it validate this era of Penguins hockey, as I would first contend? Yes, but for me, this is a totally different team outside of the 5 gentlemen I mentioned at the top of the show: Crosby, Malkin, Fleury, Kunitz, Letang. Outside of those 5, everything is turned over, from the general manager down to the head coach and the coaching staff and all of the supporting players. Yes, you still have Mario Lemieux and Ron Burkle as your co-owners. You still have David Morehouse as your team president. But under them, everything, almost everything, has changed outside of those stars and a couple of those foundational pieces. And for Crosby and Malkin, I think this is a transformational moment. When you get to that second cup, when you match franchise luminaries like Mario, like Jaromir Jagr, like Kevin Stevens going back to the day, Tom Barrasso, when you match guys like that who have that name recognition, that cachet in Penguins history, then you've reached a new level. And I don't think you can consider the Penguins to have been disappointments in this era anymore. I believe we all thought, at least I did, that this team, this core, would collect multiple championships over the course of its stay in Pittsburgh, and it has achieved that at the bare minimum. It's still one cup behind that talented group in Chicago, the Blackhawks, Jonathan Taves, Patrick Kane, Marian Hossa, former Penguin, of course, and former Detroit Red Wing. He didn't win the Cup with either of those two teams, Detroit or Pittsburgh, but he's cashed in big time in Chicago. And much like in Pittsburgh, there aren't that many Chicago Blackhawks who have won their 3 Cups, but you boil it down, even in an extreme team sport, maybe the ultimate team sport in hockey, you still boil it down to those top players because those are the faces of your program. If you're the Penguins or the Blackhawks, or in the case of the Los Angeles Kings, winners of 2 Cups, your Anze Kopitars, your Drew Doughty's, Jonathan Quicks. And again, that's a short list. There aren't very many who you could consider to be significant contributors to both of the Kings Stanley Cups. But the Penguins have reached that level in this post-lockout era, one of 3 teams to win multiple Cups, along with those 2 I just mentioned to you. And for me, this seems both a conclusion to a quest to get that 2nd Cup, and also a beginning, because this team has a tremendous shot to be right there in Cup contention for at least the next couple of seasons, especially next season, because there are only 3 free agents, 2 of them restricted in Bo Bennett and Justin Schultz. Ben Lovejoy is the only true unrestricted free agent that the Penguins are going to maybe have to try to bring back. They could also elect to turn away from number 12 after a terrific postseason, but they could decide that he's a little too rich for their taste in this push to rejuvenate over the course of the summer. We'll first celebrate, then rejuvenate and reload for what will be a title defense in 2016-17, the 50th season in Penguins franchise history, by the way. So they'll have to add a 4th Cup to that 50th anniversary logo that they put together earlier this year. You look at who the Penguins have coming back, which, as I mentioned, is essentially everybody. And you look at some of the youth of these players, whether it be extreme youth in the case, I don't want to say extreme, but literal youth in the case of, say, Connor Sheary, Tom Kuhnhackl, Tom Wilson, Scott Wilson, don't forget about him, who was injured late in the regular season, but was pumping in goals at an impressive rate before that happened. Brian Rust impressed me to a great degree, even though he continues to be, I would say, a limited player, but a very productive one in the playoffs for sure, and showed himself to be an NHL player, perhaps most importantly. Oskar Sundqvist didn't play a lot in the playoffs, but he would project to improve. You have, like I said, the literal youth and then the relative youth. Players like Crosby and Malkin and Letang, still in their late 20s and still capable of producing game and series deciding plays on a regular to semi-regular basis. And even if Marc-Andre Fleury returns, and that's a completely different story for maybe a different time as we move on down along the road this summer, but even if Fleury does return, he is just in his early 30s, and that's in the middle of the prime for most goaltenders, even a goalie like himself who uses his athleticism to a great effect and to a great advantage. But the way he's played recently with enhanced technique under goaltending coach Mike Bales, if the Pens do elect to keep him as their 1 or 1A with Matt Murray in 2016-17, they can expect him to still be at or near the top of his game. There are a couple of guys, maybe just one guy, in fact, that you couldn't expect to at least maintain his level, and that would be Chris Kunitz in his mid-30s. If they bring back Ben Lovejoy, I think we can anticipate a slight dip in his play, too, as he moves toward that second stage, the back 9 of his career, to use a golf metaphor, appropriately on this U.S. Open week. But for the most part, I see no reason to believe these Penguins won't be even better than they were down the stretch this season. And there aren't many cases where you could argue they caught that cliched lightning in a bottle. I'll use it here, though, because it does apply. Maybe someone like Brian Rust, you can't expect him to score as many goals as he did over the course of the Stanley Cup playoffs, but I think you can expect Connor Sheary to fit in a top 6 role moving into the future. I think you can expect Tom Kuhnhackl to be a serviceable bottom 6 winger coming up this year. I guess Matt Cullen is someone that you can't really expect to continue on in his current level of play, although it turns out he was playing with a broken toe, I believe it was, for the final several games in the Stanley Cup playoffs. If he wants to come back and give it a shot at age 39, then the level of fitness that he showed, I think, bodes quite well for how he could fit in, again, in a supplementary role. But you look back to the top of the depth chart. You look back to the leaders of this team in terms of play, not just because they wear letters on their jerseys, but Sidney Crosby and Yevgeny Malkin. Malkin, news came out that he might need Tommy John surgery, what we usually associate with baseball pitchers. It looked like Malkin had a little less steam on his passes and especially his shots after that injury he sustained in mid-March, which triggered the union of the HBK line. So it was definitely a bittersweet moment for the Penguins, as it turned out. But if we assume that Malkin can get that repaired and be back to where we're used to seeing him, like we saw him flying around the ice, maybe adding a little bit more of the puck skill that wasn't quite there at times in the playoffs. I like this Penguins team to be right up there with any team in the NHL in terms of odds for winning the Stanley Cup again. And this may sound like what we said in 2009-10, similar situation, except all the stars were younger. And Dan Bylsma was a first-year head coach, well, going into his first year as a head coach at the NHL level. It's a little different for this edition of the Penguins, though, because you have Mike Sullivan in his first year coaching the Penguins, but he had that stint back in the previous decade with the Boston Bruins. Learned some lessons and moved on from there, was a longtime assistant under John Tortorella with the Rangers and the Canucks. Also coached in the Blackhawks system in their organization, picked up some stuff from there, including how to play fast and with skill, and the idea that was the way to do it to succeed in the NHL these days if you have the horses, and the Penguins eventually did get those, thanks to Jim Rutherford. Sullivan, I think, can be expected to be better than Dan Bylsma was in his first full season coaching the Penguins. And all of the core pieces for this team should be better this second time around defending a cup. And for that reason, I believe, as I mentioned, this is not just a conclusion, but it is a beginning. The team has speed. The team has skill. It has depth for the first time in a while, for the first time since, you could argue, the 2009-10 season. You saw three threats to score in each of the top three forward lines for the Penguins this year. And you'd have to go back to the days of Crosby, Malkin, and Stahl down the middle before you could say that about this Pens team. Yes, I know Jordan Stahl stayed around until the end of the 2011-12 season, but you'll remember that year and the year previous was broken up by significant injuries to Sidney Crosby, who missed parts of both seasons, and Yevgeny Malkin, who blew out his knee late in that 2010-11 season. So 2009-10 was their last really good shot with those three lines to do something, and they couldn't quite pull it off. After that, the depth started to go downhill. You replaced Stahl with Brandon Sutter. No offense to Brandon, but he's no Jordan Stahl in terms of controlling play and also being able to contribute at the defensive end in addition to score the odd goal every once in a while. So this is a return to what the Penguins thought they had going for many, many years to come after their previous cup in 2009, which is a team that can roll lines and a team that has a mobile, puck-moving defense, a team without a true defensive defenseman. I guess Ben Lovejoy might fit that category, but maybe Ian Cole as well, but both of them can make a breakout pass. Both of them don't look out of their element in the offensive zone like a Rob Scuderi did, like a Hal Gill did, if you want to go back to that 2009 Cup team again. And that's the way you have to play it, with the game being as fast as ever and as skilled as ever. You need everyone on the ice, all five skaters at least, maybe getting occasional help with a breakout from your goaltender as well. But all five skaters need to be able to move the puck. They need to be able to skate, and that's what the Penguins had. Even without Trevor Daley in the final, the Penguins discovered ways to shelter Justin Schultz when the Sharks were pressing and when the Penguins were trying to protect a lead. They did that by double-shifting Chris Letang, who was an absolute cardiovascular freak. And I don't know if you can replicate that or expect him to do that for many, many years to come. But as I mentioned, he's in that sweet spot in his career when he has enough experience to fight through some difficulties and persevere, and also has the physical explosion to be able to be physically capable to carry the team for long, long stretches. And one last thing about this cup that stands out to me, and I mentioned being down at the championship parade on Wednesday morning and seeing that and experiencing that energy. It's such a young fan base, and yes, there are still the quote-unquote old-timers, the fans from maybe going back to even before Mario Lemieux days, but especially the fans from the Lemieux days, the early Yager days, the late Yager days, in fact. Those fans are still around, but we're building generations of hockey fans now. And this generation, I guess you could call it, maybe catching a little bit of both generations with this current era of Penguins. But this team has captivated the city. And I know everyone loves a winner, especially in Pittsburgh, where we're accustomed to teams at least challenging for division titles, conference titles, and championships on a semi-regular basis. But I think there's something a little bit more to this, and there's something a little bit more to the sport of hockey taking hold. And I discussed this back when, say, Mario Lemieux first came back. I've talked about this before. That gave Pittsburgh hockey a little bit of a boost, and then Sidney Crosby being drafted, and then the Penguins going to the final with he and Yevgeny Malkin and Marc-Andre Fleury, that young team. And now that young team has matured, and they picked up some more. The teenagers and the fans from their early 20s who will one day make up the core of that fan base. So Pittsburgh is still primarily a football town, I think, if you take into account all demographics, both genders and all ages. But if you look at the youth, if you look at the female fans, I think, too, which have definitely grown over the course of my 20 years following this team, following the Penguins, we're seeing just a more diverse fan base, and that is great, and I think it represents Pittsburgh on the whole, a city that has more traditional demographic roots, but has grown to a point where people are coming in from outside, and actually it's getting back to the city's immigrant roots in a lot of ways, because you're finally having people come into the city of Pittsburgh and not leave, and so many of those are young people both coming back to the area and staying in the area. And that wave is powering, I think, this Penguins run of popularity. And the website I work for, dkpittsburghsports.com, definitely benefits from that, as do anyone who, I guess, profits from the success of the Penguins and the hockey team. So quite the week, quite the celebratory mood after the Penguins wrapped up Game 6 in San Jose on Sunday nights and paraded the cup around the ice surface at the SAP Center. We'll talk a little bit more about how the Penguins got there with my first guest on the show, Alan Saunders. He's coming up next on Gike's Got Game. Keep it right here for the second period of the show. Back in the Millvale studios, this is Gike's Got Game. Time for the second period, and time to talk with the man we've been discussing the Penguins Stanley Cup run with over the course of the past month. It wouldn't be right to finish the hockey season without checking in with him once again. He is a freelance journalist in the Pittsburgh area, writing for PiratesProspects.com and the Associated Press, among others. And a good friend of mine, his name is Alan Saunders, and he joins me on the guest line this time. Not live, but hey, we'll make it work, right, Alan?
Yeah, we'll do what we can. I'm sure you're still drying out from your Oakmont experience.
Yes, recording this on a Thursday night, it was almost an entire washout up at Oakmont, and only 9 of the 156 players finished their first round. So we have plenty of golf to play moving forward, and I got stuck right out in the middle of the course during a downpour. So, well, maybe next time I'll bring an umbrella or a jacket or something, but maybe I won't, because the rest of the weekend looks really good weather-wise. So, Alan, let's look back at Sunday night. We talked, you and I, after Game 5 here in the studio, and the Penguins had controlled that game. Martin Jones played terrifically well for the Sharks, and San Jose put in 3 in the first period. That was enough to extend the series out. But what about Game 6, in your mind, allowed the Penguins to close it out, a game that didn't end up being a blowout by any means, but once again, the Penguins were in command for much of it?
Yeah, I think, to me, really, Sidney Crosby really dominated the game from a possession standpoint, from a zone time standpoint. There were just times when it was just impossible to take the puck away from. And, the Penguins, they played defense with offense. They did play good defense, and they did block shots. But for the most part, San Jose couldn't get the puck to go play offense. And the fact that they only gave up, I believe it was 2 shots in the third period.
Yeah.
But the 1-goal lead there. I mean, that's That's good stuff. And like I said, it wasn't some, it didn't look like a stifling defensive performance. When the first time you looked at the shot total from your third period, you're like, whoa, really? And I think it was because the Penguins had the puck the whole time. And I think, Crosby was a big driver of that. And to be honest, I think it was one of the reasons he ended up winning the Conn Smythe Trophy. Just that performance in Game 6 is what Sidney Crosby is all about. He used his strength and his skating and his just relentlessness to just be, I think somebody called him the world's best grinder, and it really is accurate. He plays a very simple game at times extremely well, and I think he really stood out. And then Chris Letang was just phenomenal and everywhere at the same time, creating offense all the way down below the goal line in the offensive zone, and then back cleaning up rebounds in front of Matt Murray. And I think really the Penguins stars stood out in that on that big stage, whereas I don't feel that San Jose's did at all.
I'm so glad that Chris Letang had an opportunity there in Game 6 to show the hockey world what he was all about in the biggest game of the year. And it's not just on that goal, which was breathtaking, by the way he controlled the puck, spun away, showed off his skating, his skill, his ability to think the game all in a manner of 5 or 10 seconds. And then, of course, flashing open, and Crosby, of course, hits him with the passes, as Crosby often does. So if I had to rank, Alan, the three most valuable players for the Penguins in the playoffs, I don't have an issue with Sidney Crosby winning. I think it could have easily gone to Phil Kessel, but I put Chris Letang right up there with those two. What say you on the subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had a Conn Smythe ballot, I probably would have read Kessel, Crosby, Letang, especially after that Game 6 from Letang. He's so important to what they do on the power play at even strength. Just the ability to extend a shift in the offensive zone, to go back quickly, retrieve a puck, and prevent an entire possession for the opposition when maybe 90% of the defensemen in the league wouldn't have been able to do that. It's just such a valuable thing, and he doesn't get recognized for it all the time. He is prone to the blatant turnover or misplay at times. So I think some people leave a negative impression of him in some people's eyes, but man, he is just solid and impressive, and he just keeps getting better. Physically, he doesn't seem to be any different than he was 5 years ago, but his defensive play is so solid that, it's like he is the team's number one defensive defenseman, while at the same time being one of the league's elite offensive defensemen.
Let's talk about that concept, and Alan Saunders is my guest over the phone this time on Gike's Got Game. The concept of offense as defense, if you will. And does it feel to you that the general populace, the hockey-enjoying public, is beginning to appreciate that more or understand that more, that you're not looking necessarily for a quote-unquote shutdown defender? You're looking for someone like Drew Doughty or a Chris Letang, who is going to have the puck more often than not, and who is going to, as a result, limit chances for the opposition just because the opposition can't get their sticks on it.
Yeah, and I think it's everything in sports is cyclical. And I think all of this is sort of a reaction to the rule changes that came about after the 2004-05 lockout, when the effectiveness of a neutral zone trap kind of game really went out the window in a big hurry. And then, it took teams a little bit of time to sort of adjust to what the new normal was going to be. And I think that for a while in there, maybe some big, strong defensive guys looked like they were still going to be able to be effective because offenses hadn't maximized their tactics either. Really, in 10 years in the scheme of the sport is not exactly a large sample size when you're talking about, major changes the way the game is played. And so I think now, if you take sort of maybe the 2007-08 Detroit Red Wings teams that sort of popularized this offensive style that is now propagated throughout the league: Chicago, Tampa, the Penguins, um, you know, to some extent, really, and in Nashville, Dallas, certainly. And I think now, if you're going to play a team that's going to come with speed and the ability to play the puck at the blue line or dump it in and beat a slow-footed defenseman to it, the only real weapon against that is a defenseman that's able to turn, skate, and make a quick and precise outlet pass. And I think that's why now I think you are getting some recognition from Chris Letang, whereas 10 years ago, I think the thought process would have been, well, he's a nice player, but to play real defense, you need to look more like Zdeno Chara.
Right. Yeah, Chara might be another one of those prototypical defensive defensemen, even though he would chip in occasionally and sometimes even stand in front of the net on the power play, if we might remember back to his younger days. I brought this up in the opening segment, Alan. I want to run it by you. The Penguins moving into the future here, I know this feels a bit like a conclusion maybe, or maybe a fulfillment of potential for a couple of the Penguins' core players, Crosby, Malkin, Letang. In particular, they had their second cups respectively, even if the team, for the most part, changed drastically around them. But this feels like a beginning as well, doesn't it, with some of the younger players that they were able to add and that those younger players were able to contribute greatly. And also the star players are still in their late 20s, so I know I'm not alone in feeling very optimistic about this team's chances to do it again. I know it's a 6-month regular season you have to get through, injuries you have to dodge, slumps that you have to cut short whenever they do pop up, but I don't see any reason why this team will be right back in that familiar spot of cup contender once the playoffs start next spring.
Yeah, I think that, it's never easy. And it is the hardest trophy in all sports to win, team sports, for a reason. And I think that especially the Penguin situation might be a little bit difficult next year just because there's the World Cup this offseason with many of the Penguin star players that you mentioned participating. And then, sort of poor timing with the expansion draft likely coming at the end of next season. Sort of giving them a bit of uncertainty there. On the whole, I think everything is in place for the Penguins to have an extremely successful season next year. They're the odds-on Vegas favorite for the Stanley Cup in 2017, but there's a great deal of uncertainty there at this point, given what can happen. And the other thing I think maybe gets glossed over a bit is that there would have been a lot of the same sort of excitement at this point in 2009, and the league adjusted to what Dan Bylsma and those Penguins were doing. So the league will now have that opportunity to adjust to what Mike Sullivan's Penguins are doing, and we'll see if they're able to, and if he's able to continue to play that chess match, because that's something that not everyone can do.
Sullivan did well in adjusting during the playoffs, tinkering with the Penguins' breakout at times, and especially in those final two rounds, the Lightning and the Sharks appeared to have some sort of foothold a little bit early in hemming the Pens in or doing something that was causing trouble, and Sullivan changed it up, and that worked to great effect. One last thing here before we wrap the segment here and put a bow on the 2015-16 season. Alan, what do you think is going to happen with the goaltending situation? You have Marc-Andre Fleury still under contract for 3 more seasons. Matt Murray is on his entry-level deal and, of course, just won a cup, even with some hiccups closer to the end of the playoffs. Overall, he was rather solid for them in net, as solid as they needed to go all the way. But what do you think happens? Where do we stand coming up here in early October when they rev it up for another regular season?
Well, I don't think the Penguins want to be rid of either of their goaltenders. I don't think that Matt Murray played very well, but I don't think that he played well enough that you could think at this point that no other goaltender with experience is necessary, and Jeff Zatkoff or whoever could be his backup. It's only ever split time as a professional, 40, 42 games, something like that. It's the most he's played in a regular season coming in. And sort of just like I was saying about Mike Sullivan, NHL shooters are going to get the chance to adjust to him too. Although he had a very high save percentage in the playoffs, it did seem that there were some systematically scored goals against him that can be something of a red flag going forward. If the word gets around that there is a way to beat a goaltender, NHL scorers will find a way to exploit that to their advantage. So there's certainly some things to worry about with Matt Murray. Marc-Andre Fleury is certainly at the stage of his career where I don't think him requesting a trade would be out of line or something like that. And I would assume that Jim Rutherford would attempt to honor that, but that could be very difficult for the Penguins. Fleury has a no trade clause where he can block trades to up to 12 NHL teams. He carries a relatively high cap hit for a goaltender, and it's not an ideal circumstance to be trying to trade Fleury at this point. And so I think it would be very difficult for the Penguins to get good value for him on the trade market, which is why I think the ideal situation would be to have two goaltenders and play, part-time for this season. And then the big red flag in all of that is, of course, the expansion draft coming up at the end of the 16-17 season, where it appears that the rules will prevent the Penguins from keeping both of them. And so I think at some point, Jim Rutherford's hands are going to be tied into doing something, and I'm not quite sure at this point what that could look like. It could look like trading Matt Murray. I think, to be honest, from a pure asset standpoint, that could be the smarter move. But trading the incumbent Stanley Cup winning goaltender would not be a popular decision.
That'd be something, wouldn't it, if Jim Rutherford would make that move? I agree with you, because you'd be trading an asset at its highest value, at least right now, for the foreseeable future. And I think you can say that you would have still very competent, if not above average goaltending in Fleury once he's able to get a summer under his belt and maybe think about what just happened and think about how he wants to continue his career with the Penguins, if he does want to do that. I guess we don't even know that at this point. The NHL draft is coming up too. I know that. That's a big time for trades, so there really isn't that much time to fully revel in this before you start to look ahead to next season, but we will fully enjoy what just happened here in the city of Pittsburgh. You saw it with the parade and continuing on throughout the summer. Alan, thanks for your time and your insight. Always welcomed here on Gike's Got Game. We'll talk to you soon, I'm sure. Until then, I guess I'll see you down at PNC Park early next week.
Yes, we'll do the same. And man, Pirates, I'm sure you talked about them in their open, but they're
not really.
Go of it right now.
We'll talk about them later, I guess. Plenty of summer ahead for that. We'll see how that goes, but looking like a rather average team as of late. That's Alan Saunders. I'm Matt Gike. We will be right back with another interview. Mike Matheson joins me for some golf talk for the first time on this show on Gike's Got Game.
Hi, I'm Mike Storr, host of the Awesome Cast, which you can hear right here on River's Edge Radio. We're talking tech, getting geeky every week with people from Pittsburgh in the industry. Go check us out, awesomecast.net, or listen to us right here on River's Edge Radio, Thursday mornings, 8 a.m. after Funny Money.
Hi, I'm Tom, and I know money.
And I'm Matt, and I know funny.
Catch us Thursday mornings at 7 a.m. Real financial information
For the regular guy.
right here at riversedgepgh.com.
Your voice for local music.
Back for the third segment, third period of Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge. We talked hockey. Let's talk about a different kind of stick, the golf club. And it's in the hands of 156 players up at Oakmont Country Club this weekend. The U.S. Open for the 9th time is in Pittsburgh at Oakmont. And joining me on the line, on the guest line, to talk about the Open and a very wet first day. We didn't really even get halfway through the first round, but we can still discuss that and preview the rest of this weekend. Good friend of mine, Mike Matheson. I'm always on his show, or I regularly guest on his show back in Weirton, West Virginia, my hometown. Mike, it's time for you to return the favor, I guess. Welcome to the program.
Well, my pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You got it. Let the listeners know what your background is in the game of golf. You're a sports editor for the Weirton Daily Times and the Steubenville Herald-Star, but how'd you get involved with the game, and how does it still dominate your thought process, especially during this time of the year?
Well, I started playing junior golf at the age of 5 in San Diego. Played a lot of junior golf. Was okay. I mean, not that big a deal. Then went to high school and played the typical football, basketball, but then ran track. And then eventually, I was still in the newspaper business. 1985. My mom passed away. I decided to move back home and switch gears and got in the golf business and spent the next 18 years in the golf business. And my last 5 before I got back in the newspaper business, I was the head professional at Steubenville Country Club. So played my fair share of rounds throughout in San Diego and Steubenville and Cleveland and all sorts of places. And so, yeah, I love the game. It's a great game. I love hard. I love hard, tough golf courses. I just something is really messed up in my brain if I love hard, fast golf courses. And Oakmont, I would live there the rest of my life and play that golf course every day just because I just find it so fascinating.
Have you ever played Oakmont? I didn't even ask you that this week.
I played it twice. I played it in the media day in 2007.
Okay.
And that was when I was still playing golf, so I cared what I shot that day. Okay. And then I played the media day 6 weeks ago, and I played once in 2 years. Huh. And my goal that entire day was to get every shot airborne. And so I accomplished that goal. I found, I think, 10 fairway bunkers.
Oh, boy.
So I have firsthand knowledge of how brutal the fairway bunkers are at Oakmont.
For the listeners out there who don't know Oakmont that well or don't know maybe tournament golf very well, what makes Oakmont such a challenge? There's so many hazards out there, even though they took all the trees off the property about a decade ago.
Well, I think the biggest thing that makes Oakmont so hard, if you go, let's say go from tee forward, is you have to find sight. You have to find visually. You have to find a place to hit the ball because with all the trees gone, it's kind of a huge blank canvas, and you've got to be able to find a place to aim for to keep the ball in the fairway because the fairways, as you know, are very contoured, very slopey, and very hard and very firm. Well, the tour players get a lot of sight lines based on grandstands and TV towers and that type stuff. But for the average everyday golfer, you don't get that. So that's one. 2, you got to keep it in the fairway, and 3, the greens are just easily the hardest greens I've ever played because they're so fast and so undulating, and there are a handful of putts where the hole doesn't matter. You got to find a spot that's wherever it is and try to inch it up to the hole as best you can. The greens are just they said in Monday's practice round the greens are stimping at about 16, and for people to know that is like putting in your bathroom, like putting on your linoleum floor. And your linoleum floor is probably a little bit slower than what the greens would be at Oakmont. So it's just a hard test. The rough is up. The fairway bunkers are brutal because you can't really play out of the fairway bunkers toward the green. You got to usually play sideways onto the fairway and try to get up and down from anywhere from 50 to 180 yards, which is not easy for anybody, especially the best players in the world. That at some point in time, that's gonna drive you absolutely nuts. So Oakmont is just hard in a lot of different ways. But one thing Oakmont's really cool with is they give you a lot of options off the tee. And when the fairways are really hard and firm and fast, like they were for the first 3 days of the practice round, Jason Day said that on the 15th hole, which is 500 yards, he was probably going to hit 2 or 3 iron because he wanted to keep it in the fairway and keep it back. And so, as Sid Mickelson said yesterday, that you could have 2 or 3 options off each tee based on the wind, based on how you felt, based on what it looked to you. And so that's where Oakmont is really, really, I think, unique in a lot of ways where you have a lot of different options off the tee, and it's whatever you got to find to put the ball in the fairway.
Talking U.S. Open with my good friend Mike Matheson, who's up there at Oakmont with me this week. We're both covering the event. The center of the golf universe is Pittsburgh, PA. over the next 3 or 4 days. I guess we'll see how long it takes to finish up this tournament. They're going to try their level best to get it done by Sunday evening. And you brought up the part about the options off the tee. That was my favorite part of the pre-tournament press conferences that we both were privy to there at Oakmont. Listening to the different players discuss the different strategies they would take off the tee. Day, I think McIlroy, Danny Willett was talking about laying back a little bit more. Then you had players like your Brendan Grace, Ricky Fowler saying you want to be a little more aggressive maybe off the tee. And this all goes back to Mike Davis, the executive director of the United States Golf Association, which sets up, and he is overseeing the setup of the golf course for the U.S. Open each and every year, and he wants that option to be in play. What do you think is the best way to go about it, especially from the tee box? Mike, how would you attack this golf course, I suppose?
Well, because the holes are so unique, like today, Rory hit irons off 1, 2, and 3, hit into the fairway bunkers on 2 and 3, made bogey. Then he hit driver 3-wood to the green on 4 and made birdie. And so, but I would really, personally, I would attack one as best I could. But as you've seen, the second shot is straight downhill and it doesn't play yardage. I mean, when I played in the media day, I think I had 189 yards in and hit 9-iron because it's so far downhill and you want to land the ball 40 to 50 yards short of the green and just let it roll up. So, but I would try to attack that. I would really attack 4. It's a very gettable hole on the front. I think I would attack 2 because I just think you can go birdie there, and I would personally try to attack as much as possible as long as the driver was going relatively straight. But if you're hitting it sideways, that's the other good thing about Oakmont. If you hit your driver a couple times sideways and it doesn't feel good, then you put the driver away and you hit 3-wood or you hit hybrid or you hit 2 or 3-iron, knowing you can keep it in the fairway and still score. But I especially when the golf course got softer because of all the rain, I would really take out driver as much as I could and see if I was hitting it well. I would just keep challenging that golf course as much as I could.
With that rain you talked about, we might get some more here overnight into Friday. Do you think that significantly increases the chances that someone at least threatens par in this tournament? Because, we have a couple of guys under par, but as I mentioned, going into Friday, half the field hasn't even teed off yet, so it's tough to really gauge it. But the course is going to be softer still on Friday, maybe even a little bit into Saturday as things get hotter and sunnier. 5 over won it last time when Angel Cabrera edged out Tiger Woods and Jim Furyk in 2007. That was a really hot, dry week. Where do you see this final score, the winning score, ending up in terms of relation to par?
I still will call over par.
Okay.
Because I think the best scoring day is tomorrow. Because we're right now, according to the weather forecast I looked at, there's nothing coming in from tomorrow morning on. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday in good weather. 84 on Saturday, 88 on Sunday, with dry and a bit of wind, which means the golf course will dry out and will play back to kind of sort of where it was early in the week. And as you saw today, you still got to put the ball in the fairway. You still have to put the ball in the fairway. And with the rough being now nasty and gnarly and wet, makes it even harder. And so I'm looking at it close to, I think, 3 or 4 over par. I still believe. I think guys can play really well and shoot 65, 6, 7. But then I think after that, I think the last couple rounds, 72 is a really good score. 72 is still 2 over par.
Yeah.
I think if you, I would say this: if right now you can ask a guy to post 2 over and go in the clubhouse, I think a lot of guys would take it. Just because they know the golf course will only get firmer, will only get faster, will only get harder. And you said in those press conferences too, and all the guys said, even Nicholson said it. They all said the golf course right now is perfect. The greens are perfect. The fairways are perfect. Everything is perfect, but it's really hard because you have to decide where you want to hit your tee shot. You have to decide where you want to land your approach shot. There's a lot of things to decide. Well, because of all the weather, 3 days of preparation kind of went out the window. And like today on 17, I saw Jordan Spieth hit his second shot, landed, 15 feet past the pin, jumped, 30 feet past the pin, and zipped all the way back and zipped back into the greenside bunker. Well, I didn't see that for 3 days of practice rounds. I never saw that, And even what's his name, Scotty Scheffler said today on the 11, the par 4, he said I hit a really good shot that I thought was really good, and it zipped back, and pretty soon now I have a 50-footer for birdie.
Wow.
Just because that's how we practiced and prepared for 3 days. All of a sudden now the greens are incredibly receptive. You're spinning balls back. You're doing stuff that you hadn't done for the first 3 days. And so remember what Mickelson said yesterday. He quoted Stephen Hawking. You have to adapt to your circumstances. And tomorrow's the best day of scoring. It's just going to get harder and harder Saturday and Sunday. And if the wind kicks up, it's going to be brutal. It's not going to be fun at all.
Yeah, by the time we get to Saturday and Sunday, it could be right where we thought we would see this tournament. To your point about hitting fairways, Andrew Landry, the surprise, half-day leader, if you want to put it that way, 28-year-old PGA Tour rookie, he hit 10 of 14 fairways, and he's got a chance to knock in another birdie on his last hole when we resume play Friday morning. That would put him at what, 4 under? That's correct.
4 under 66, yeah.
Yeah, that would be an excellent score at Oakmont, the par 70. The monster, the brute on Holton Road, they once called it, and still could call it that accurately to this day. Thanks, Mike, for the expertise. Appreciate that, and we'll talk to you, Friday from Oakmont.
Pleasure, Matt. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That's Mike Matheson. I'm Matt Gike. We'll step aside and bring it back for the overtime on Gike's Got Game. It's overtime on Gike's Got Game. This hour is zoomed by. Thanks to Mike Matheson and Alan Saunders for helping me pass the time. Hope you enjoyed the interviews to expert witnesses, if you want to use court terminology. Called them up to the stand, and now we move on to the closing arguments, if you want to extend the metaphor out. And, speaking of metaphors, I'm going to kill one of those. Kill the cliche. This came to mind when I was at Oakmont Thursday afternoon, when I first heard the phrase for the first time in this golf tournament, at least, the leader in the clubhouse. And golf is the only sport in which this is acceptable as a cliche, the leader in the clubhouse. You'll hear this in many different senses other than the literal sense, meaning the golfer who has finished his round and has posted the lowest score. He is the leader in the clubhouse, quite literally. We've taken that to mean, any manner of things. For instance, maybe the best idea of a group is the leader in the clubhouse in the early stages of a debate, or the baseball team that finishes its game and is waiting for other teams to wrap up and is anticipating clinching a division title, for instance. You know what? They actually are in the clubhouse, but they're not the leader in the clubhouse. They are simply in the clubhouse after celebrating a win. So that's one's kind of close. I guess golf and baseball are the only two sports who have clubhouses instead of locker rooms or dressing rooms like other sports do. But I think we can leave leader in the clubhouse to golf. It's become a little too trite in the other sports and other areas. Like I said, it's not just sports, but it's other spots in life. In fact, I think I noticed this pop up more outside the realm of sports than I do inside. It's one of those things that maybe a journalist or a TV broadcaster, a news reporter will say to kind of make it sound folksy and make things relatable, be a little irreverent with the news. Leader in the clubhouse, I think we can keep that with golf because it's such a cool phrase in golf. It sounds good, doesn't it? The leader in the clubhouse. It has a certain cachet, and I would suggest we let it stay in the world of flag sticks and yardage markers and tee boxes and all the rest. Let's kill that cliche where it is a cliche, not where it is, in fact, a literal phrase, and a very useful literal phrase, as it turns out. I used it in my story Thursday from the first round of the United States Open Championship, the 9th to come to Pittsburgh. And It's the 116th Open Championship, but that is not my final number today as I wrap up this edition of Gike's Got Game. No, the final number is 0. You could argue 0 isn't even really a number. It's a lack of a number, but I would argue the contrary there. 0 is the number of times the Penguins have won a Stanley Cup with a coach not in his first year with the team. Count back with me, 1991, Badger Bob Johnston took over the team after a successful stint with the Calgary Flames. Prior to that, where he got the Badger nickname was when he coached the University of Wisconsin to great success in NCAA play. But under Badger Bob, the Penguins won in 91. And unfortunately, tragically, Badger Bob passed away of brain cancer the following fall. So it was up to Scotty Bowman, the all-time winningest NHL head coach, to lead the Penguins to another championship. So it was a back-to-back title in 92, but not with the same coach. With extenuating circumstances. You might want to put an asterisk by that one, but the fact remains that it was Scotty Bowman, not Badger Bob, who took the Penguins back to the mountaintop in 92. Then 2009, it wasn't just a first-year coach, it was a mid-season coaching replacement. Dan Bylsma assuming the reins, assuming the job that was vacated, not willingly, by Michel Therrien, who was fired in mid-February of 2009 with the Penguins out of the playoffs. They were in 10th place, I want to say, at that point in the year, and then the Penguins ripped off 19-5-4 stretch to finish the regular season, and we know how that playoff finished up, too, with the Penguins and Sidney Crosby hoisting the Stanley Cup after a Game 7 victory at Joe Louis Arena in Detroit. And then you skip ahead to 2016, and another mid-season coaching change, one of just a handful in league history that led directly to a championship that same year. Mike Sullivan, assuming Mike Johnston's old team, so a story of Mike and Mike, but not in the morning. It was on the ice for the Penguins this year, and it worked out. The second Mike, much a better fit for the franchise than the first. Jim Rutherford played a large role in revamping the team, getting it quicker, getting it more apt with puck moving from the back end, from the front end, from all aspects. But Mike Sullivan molded this team, shaped it, and put it together. And there you had it. The Penguins' fourth Stanley Cup champion and their fourth with a first-year head coach. So the true challenge, I've been joking, but maybe it's not a joke anymore. The true challenge will be for a Penguins coach in his second year or further to win a title. That has proven to be impossible. In 49 years of Penguins hockey, we will have a 50th coming up this season. Well, no, wait, we were through 50 seasons. We will have a 51st season, but it's the 50th anniversary, kind of a gray area there. But we've completed 5 decades of Penguins hockey, we'll put it that way, and we have not yet seen a coach win it in his second season or third season, fourth season, fifth, on, so on and so forth. The Penguins franchise has been rough on head coaches, and this is just the latest example, just the most fresh example after the Penguins win the title. Thanks for listening to Gike's Got Game. It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you once again, both in audio and video form. Thank you to Tom Benoit for setting up the show, running the board. And again, thank you for watching and listening. This is Matt reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. Have an awesome week, and I'll see you right back in here again for another episode of Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge.